My son laid a hand on me inside my own kitchen, and I didn't say a word, not because I was afraid, but because something in me went cold and clear, like a judge hearing the final piece of evidence. The next morning, I served him breakfast, and he came downstairs wearing that same arrogance, the kind that thinks a mother's silence is surrender, the kind that believes a woman's love is permission to do anything and still be forgiven. He didn't even notice the swelling on my lip at first. He just grabbed a biscuit like he owned the table, like he owned the house, like he owned me. He started talking about how things were going to change around here, how he was in charge, how a little discipline had finally put me back where I belonged. Crumbs fell onto my lace cloth like disrespect made visible. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp, punctual, merciless, and the world shifted. I stood up calmly, smoothed my dress, and walked to the front door without answering his orders to send them away. When I opened it, the Savannah morning air rolled in, and with it came the weight of authority. My neighbor, Mrs. Bernice Johnson, retired federal judge, dressed like court was in session. Detective David Miller from our church, uniform crisp, face stern, and two officers behind him, quiet but unmistakable. I led them into the house like honored guests, like witnesses to a truth that had been hidden too long, and when they entered my dining room, Jeremiah froze so hard the biscuit slipped from his hand and broke into crumbs on the floor. His face drained gray, eyes wide, and in that 1 second he understood my silence had never been forgiveness, it had been a verdict. My name is Gwendolyn Hayes. I'm 68, a widow, and I live in an old Savannah neighborhood with porches wide enough for rocking chairs and oak trees that hold a century of secrets in their branches. I raised my son alone after my husband Robert died, worked myself thin so Jeremiah would never go without, poured love into him like it was an endless well, believed the boy I raised would grow into the man my husband would be proud of. And for years he did. He went to college, the first in our family, and our church celebrated him like a miracle. He got a job at the port where Robert worked, helped with bills, sat beside me in the pew on Sundays, and sang hymns with a deep voice that sounded just like his daddy's. I lived for that pride. I thought my sacrifice had written a good ending. But life doesn't always fall apart with one loud explosion. Sometimes it cracks quietly, one small cruelty at a time, until you look up one day and realize you've been living with a stranger. It started after his job changed. Restructuring, they called it, demotion, less pay, less respect, and something inside him turned bitter. He began coming home late, smelling like cheap bourbon, calling it meetings. Then the money tightened, and he started borrowing and never returning. Then he stopped asking and started taking. Then came the day he snapped at me over something as small as a dripping faucet, slamming his newspaper so hard the cup jumped, standing over me with a look in his eyes I'd never seen before, resentment like poison. That was the first time I felt fear in my own kitchen, the first time I realized my son was becoming someone I couldn't reach. After he lost his job completely, it got worse. Everything was my fault. Rain, bills, the world, even his father's death. He rewrote history to justify misery, blamed me for the hole inside him, used my love like a leash. And I became quiet. I hid behind routines. I walked on eggshells. I stopped inviting friends over. I lied to my best friend Bernice when she asked if I was okay. I told myself it was temporary, told myself he'd come back to himself, told myself a mother endures. That's what mothers do. But enduring isn't the same thing as living, and silence isn't the same thing as peace. Then, that night, around 3:15 in the morning, the key scraped in the lock, rough and angry. Rain was pounding, and Jeremiah stumbled and soaked, furious, smelling of liquor and cigarettes. He threw his keys and shattered my grandmother's blue vase like it was nothing. When he saw me sitting in my rocking chair in the kitchen, he started yelling about his life, about the house, about my junk, about how I cared more about memories than him. I stood slowly and told him to go to bed, to rest, to talk in the morning. That motherly calm, my last attempt to be gentle, lit a fuse. He grabbed my arms and shook me hard enough I felt my teeth rattle. Then he threw me into the china cabinet. My back hit wood. My head cracked glass. And then he slapped me, loud, Wet, final, splitting my lip, filling my mouth with a metallic taste of blood. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stared at him from the floor and realized the man looking back at me wasn't my boy. He turned and walked upstairs like he'd stepped on a bug, leaving me bruised and bleeding in my own kitchen. The silence afterward wasn't peace. It was a warning. It was the sound of something sacred breaking. I stumbled to the mirror in the half-bath and washed my face with cold water. I saw my lip, the bruise blooming, the shame trying to crawl up my throat and lock my voice again. And right there, staring at my own eyes, something changed. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had survived too much to die quietly in her own home. I knew the choices in front of me. Hide it, excuse it, make up another lie and pray it never happened again, or do the hardest thing a mother can do, stop protecting her child from consequences. I didn't want revenge. I wanted survival. I wanted my home back. I wanted my life back. So I cleaned the blood, not to erase evidence, but to steady my hands, and I started cooking. Not because I was pretending everything was fine, but because I was building a stage where the truth would be impossible to ignore. All night, while he slept upstairs, I baked biscuits, dozens of them, batch after batch, golden and perfect. The kitchen became my war room. The smell of butter and buttermilk didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt like resolve. A digital photo frame on my counter kept cycling through memories. Jeremiah at 8 holding a fish with Robert smiling beside him. Jeremiah at graduation with my face split by pride. Our 4th of July barbecue where he laughed in an apron like life was still normal. Those pictures hit me like grief, because happiness can be just a photograph. One frozen moment that hides what comes after. I thought about Robert, about how he never raised his voice to me, how he treated his own mother like she was made of glass, and I whispered into the empty house that he would not recognize the man our son had become. And still, I didn't want to destroy Jeremiah. I wanted the monster in him to stop. I wanted the boy he used to be to have a chance to come back if he ever could. But not at the cost of my body. Not at the cost of my peace. Not anymore. Before dawn, I made 3 calls. First to Bernice, my neighbor of 40 years, my best friend, a retired federal judge whose voice could quiet a room without raising volume. I told her what happened. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask if I was sure. She said, "Call the police," and when I asked her to come at 8 in the morning, she understood immediately. "I'm not coming for breakfast," she told me. "I'm coming to hold court." Second, I called Detective David Miller, deacon from our church, but also a man sworn to the law. I told him Jeremiah assaulted me. He offered to send a car immediately, but I asked for something different. No midnight sirens, no neighborhood circus, no scene that would make Jeremiah fight harder. I wanted him awake, sober enough to feel shame, forced to look at the witnesses. David agreed, irregular or not, because he knew me, and he knew what Jeremiah was capable of. Third, I called my sister Pet in Atlanta, because shame dies when someone you love knows the truth. She promised she'd come, promised she'd remember this day if I ever tried to forget it. Then I set the table like it was Christmas and a funeral at the same time. Lace cloth, wedding china, polished silver, a single white camellia in the center. I cooked grits, thickened peach preserves with cinnamon and nutmeg, brewed coffee, and left the broken vase shards in the hall where Jeremiah would see them. I showered, pinned my hair into a neat bun, and put on a dark Sunday dress that made my bruises stand out. I didn't hide a thing. My wounds were witnesses. When the clock neared 8, I sat at the head of the table with my hands folded, calm like stone, because by then I had already crossed the point of no return. Jeremiah came down, saw the table, saw my face, and instead of guilt, he wore satisfaction. He thought the meal meant surrender. He ate like a king, bragged like a tyrant, said he'd finally shown me who was in charge. And then the doorbell rang. When the judge and the police walked in behind me, his arrogance evaporated in seconds. Mrs. Bernice didn't even look at him the way you look at family. She looked at him the way you look at a man in court who thinks charm will erase facts. She sat in Robert's chair like authority reclaiming its seat, sipped her coffee calmly, and began reminding Jeremiah of who he used to be, the boy who carried her groceries, the young man who made the community proud, until her voice sharpened and she told him to look at my bruised face and call it what it was. Detective David read his record: complaints, bar fights, reckless behavior, and then said the words that crushed Jeremiah's last illusion: a domestic assault complaint, victim named Gwendolyn Hayes. My son's world, built on my silence, finally met the law. When Jeremiah tried to call it a family matter, I stood beside Bernice and told him the truth. I didn't call them because I hated him. I called them because I loved him, because love doesn't always look like protection. Sometimes love looks like consequences. Sometimes love is refusing to lie. I told him my forgiveness had become permission, that my silence taught him he could keep going, that last night he crossed a line that could have killed me. He cried and begged and promised rehab and church and change, but I'd heard promises before, and the bruise on my face had made something final inside me. I looked at him and said I didn't care what the neighbors would say anymore. My peace mattered more than his comfort. My life mattered more than his excuses. And when he demanded I tell them to stop, I said, quietly and clearly, that I was done lying for him. Detective David told him to stand and put his hands behind his back. Jeremiah tried rage, then pleading, then shame tactics, but the room didn't bend. The handcuffs clicked in my dining room, and that metallic sound, cold, final, was the sound of my fear leaving my body. As they let him out, he tried one last poison line, telling me I'd regret it, that I'd be alone. I met his eyes and told him maybe I'd regret that it had to come to this, but I would never regret choosing my own life. Then the car door slammed, the engine started, and the house became quiet again, but this time the quiet was light. Painful, yes. Lonely, yes. But free. The days after were strange. My sister arrived and helped me breathe again. Bernice spoke to the neighbors with dignity, so gossip couldn't feed. A security system went in. A therapist's card went into my hand. And slowly, I began to heal, not by pretending it never happened, but by finally letting the truth exist in daylight. Jeremiah faced court. He went to rehab. He spent weeks sober for the first time in years with no bottle to hide behind. And then, one day, a letter came from the jail. Short, handwritten, shaking with something real. He didn't blame me anymore. He admitted he'd become bitter and weak, that seeing my fear broke him open, that being arrested wasn't betrayal, it was an emergency break. He didn't demand forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he understood. Months passed. I returned to church circles, stitched fabrics with other women again, learned to use a tablet to read and call my sister, and found that silence could be peace when it wasn't forced. When Jeremiah completed rehab, he asked for a mediated meeting, not in my home, not alone, with a professional present. I went because I needed closure, not because my boundaries were weak. I saw a thinner man with tired eyes and real shame. He apologized without excuses. He said it wasn't the alcohol, it was him. And I told him I believed he was sorry, and that I forgave him, but forgiveness wasn't a doorway back into my home. The old version of me, the woman who protected him from everything, died the night he hit me. The love remained, but it had borders now. We would not live together again. We would meet in public. He would do therapy, meetings, work, and earn stability one day at a time. Love would still exist, but it would no longer require my suffering. A year later, we meet every 2 weeks at a diner, drink coffee and tea, share apple pie, talk about the weather and gardens and work. The relationship isn't the same. It may never be, but it's safe, and safety is priceless when you've lived in fear. My son is alive, sober, rebuilding at 42 what should have been built at 22. And I learned a truth I wish I'd known earlier. Real love isn't enduring violence in silence. Real love is drawing a line and saying, I love you, but I love myself more, and you will not cross this. Sometimes the family who stands beside you, like a judge next door and a sister in another city, is stronger than the blood that tries to break you. And if you've ever faced a moment where your peace was on the line, tell me in the comments what city you're listening from and what you would have done in my place. And if this story moved you, Please like, subscribe, and share, because stories like this remind people that silence is not safety and boundaries can save a life.